Hello, good morning. Thank you very much for attending this conference. I'm going to be looking at connected identity from the point of view of the citizen, of the individual, rather than corporate side. So very much relating to one of the questions before about the actual experience of EID. It's not going to be a technical viewpoint, it's rather a little bit more from the viewpoint of that user, non-technical, and looking at the trends. When I was asked to speak, I was thought very much about the phrase, the future's not what it used to be. And when you're talking and looking at something 20, 30, or 40 years in the future, you can be a little bit bolder with the way you think things are going to move. You can take some ideas and move them forward on. I think for 5 years, relatively speaking, whilst we're talking about there being lots of changes in the industry and the way we conduct business and connect electronically, the pace of change of fundamentals hasn't been so large. And from that point of view, this is really what I'm looking at, much more of the trends and evolution rather than revolution. So the first thing to talk about is mobile phones, mobile devices, smart devices, and looking at the endpoints. The endpoint of identity and usage of identity. And really, although we've seen the revolution from normal phones to smartphones, and I was trying to look on this slide that I'm presenting, actually the age of these phones, whether this was an old picture or not, I couldn't really tell. You know, the screens may be a bit bigger, the OS, the operating system may be a little bit different, but fundamentally for the end user, it's been pretty stable for a couple of years. Now, I believe the the smart device lifetime and cycle is around about 3 to 5 years. People changing their devices every 3 years, maybe a fundamental change taking a little bit longer. So for example, NFC, the time it's taken for NFC to actually have wide usage on the mobile has been a number of years, and one has to look at these sort of scales, and that's a very economic scale. It's a scale of how fast people can afford to change their mobiles. And as the smart devices tend to be get more expensive, and I was just told, Detlef told me earlier on that TVs generally are going down in price, yet smart devices are increasing. An interesting point of view. But the endpoints, the way that individuals will be connecting and interacting with services seems to be more and more with these smart devices, the handheld computer. And from that point of view, they've obviously gone way past the desktop and notebooks even. And that's, I think, the trend will continue. You may have slightly different formats. The devices may get a little bit bigger, smaller, transparent, bendable, but pretty much you're going to have some form of smart device in your hand, connecting to services. Whether it's personal services, interacting with smart cities, interacting with the other devices, the IoT, Internet of Things, but basically you will have some sort of handheld device. And so I think that within the next 5 years or so, I don't think that's going to change too much. You'll still have some form of device. Authentication is going to be an issue, and as people become more and more aware of the importance of correct and strong authentication, and what you're doing with the device, what you're doing and how you're interacting becoming more and more important, then authentication is likely to be that much more of an issue. It's all about convenience. This is the problem, because convenience and authentication doesn't always fit together. So it won't necessarily be a fingerprint, as I've got here. It could be some combination of biometrics. We've seen, and we've spoken at this conference over the years, different forms of biometrics and combining biometrics. But in reality, the downsides of combining biometrics, the upsides, are really secondary to convenience. And users, it's been seen quite clearly that they care very little for the real in-depth security knowledge, the knowledge of how things work, but it's convenience, it needs to be. Whether we like it as professionals or not, that's the way it is. So the combination of maybe voice recognition, facial recognition, by fingerprints, or a combination, something which can be collected easily on a smart device, is really where I think it's going. And somebody said about a year ago, I was speaking with a member of the UK government, and we were talking about the use of facial recognition on a smartphone. And he said, well, look, I've got a smartphone and it doesn't have a camera on. And it seems right. I did a bit of research and found out that in the UK, about 85% of all mobile devices sold had a camera on them. And his was an exception. And I think that you'll find probably even more now that almost every smart device will have a camera on. Whether you stick a bit of sellotape over the top to disable it or not is something else. But you will have these devices. So biometrics, which can be collected from a smart device, will be the way of authentication. Whether the combination, the type of combination, will be dependent on the level of assurance you want and what sort of the importance of the application or the action that you're looking to take. Moving on a little bit from there to identity generally. At the moment, again, I was thinking about identification and identity, and islands of identity came to mind. It really much came from something many years ago. We were talking about islands of data and islands of information and islands of services. It's the same, except now with identity. The identity are islands. They're separated out, and it's very difficult. If you look at all the attempts in Europe around the Stalk initiatives to provide interoperability, those are the first steps to try and bridge these islands. But I wondered that things didn't really change very much. Still islands of identity, it's still the islands going on, the silos. But it's important from the point of view of economics, because as the applications get either more specific or more niche sometimes, application services, then you want to increase your market size. There's limited market within your own geography, within your own little trust environment. So you want to expand out. There are things like extending the trust chain due to the supply chain is expanding all the time. You have all sorts of issues like this which mean that you can't have your small identity ecosystem by itself. You need to expand it out into a much larger environment, domain. And this is very much where Europe will be going. As I said, Stalk 2 has started now trying to put together all the mechanisms for cross-border interoperability. But there are other projects as well that the European Commission have started to implement and started to do the research in. For example, Future ID is one project which is just finishing off now and starting moving into a more deployed step, I think, is where you're looking at federation, identity federation, and starting making it a much more organic and more successful environment than what we've seen at the moment. Everybody touted identity federation as being a great answer. You know, you have do it once and then just reuse the contracts and all the rest. It doesn't work like that. In real life, I don't want to have the same governance for buying a canteen services or supplying canteen services in my company as, let's say, buying an aircraft engine. So there'll be different contracts, different ways, different levels of assurance, different liabilities, and there will be, especially within Future ID, showing where you can actually choose the path, the trust path between the user and the service, depending on liability, depending on contract, depending on levels of assurance and trust. And that will grow more and more and will become much more pushed down to the user, who will have most of it, of course, done for them automatically. But there will be opportunities to decide a lot more as to how you want to interact. So, for example, in the case of Future ID, again, you have a choice of which hubs to use. Each hub would have a different liability model, perhaps, a different LOAs requirement, etc. So that's the sort of way that I think you'll go with regards to addressing the identities, the islands of identity. And I think this is the way which, especially with the IDAS regulations coming out, or just come out now, and the actions being into law, it means that this will become more and more of a reality. Okay, looking a little bit more at the IDs, proxy IDs. At the moment, we have a problem that for the strongest assurance, using electronic IDs, maybe state IDs, they tend to be restricted in their use. Many countries restrict how the digital IDs work, or rather how they can be used. They're ruled by specific governments, their governance limitations. But most people perhaps will not want to utilize their national ID in every aspect of their lives. There's a political view, there's a social view that they don't want to use EIDs all the time. So they'll grow a class of ID, a proxy ID, which will use the national ID or the registry as a trust anchor. And then from there, they'll use that as the initial identity proofing or part of the identity proofing, and then go out, then provide their own contractual working and governance. So the move from EID, which is controlled by governance and law, governance and EID and national rules, to contractual rules with maybe specific liabilities, different liabilities, and also for a citizen to interact and be much more intimate with their identity. Very much so that we had many years ago, the credit cards went through affinity cards and people wanted to be associated with their identity, for it to be part of their own being. So the same with EIDs, how you want to actually assert your attributes, the features of your identity. In this case, my friend here, Mr. A. Minion, has chosen McDonald's, a fictitious identity provision from McDonald's. And he's either got a smart card with the McDonald's logo on, or more importantly, a mobile device, which is using only with one bit of functionality, which is asserting his age, over 18. So there's a single attribute for his ID, which is going to be, I'm over 18, and here it is. So this is one movement towards it, and you may have additional EIDs, additional identities, depending on context, and obviously from context means risk. So, for example, you may choose to have a bank-related EID, a bank-related identity, which is again tied to the registration, the registry of the in the country you are, or in your EID itself, which is used for finance, for example, with a different set of a different set of rules, different liabilities, and it will be contractual based. So it's much easier to actually come to an agreement between the user and the company. A lot of users, of course, won't look at the contracts because it's, let's just say I want to work with a bank and I'll use this particular ID. One of these things coming up now, that blurring with banks. I saw yesterday that there was an announcement from the European Banking Association that my bank is going to be starting identity authentication. And they're looking at using the bank account and your trusted bank portal that you're using already as the management tool for managing your authentication and also attribute provision. So here you can see there's this merger and looking at, well, I'm going to use a bank for my bank ID for my financial transactions. So, for example, you've got this already in the Scandinavia, doing that already. Happens to be a Scandinavian bank, an old one. I might choose another identity for online purchases. And again, all of these potentially can be linked to the strong identity originally, which is your national EID or whatever the accepted, in the words in Europe, notifiable EID that is available. So in Europe, you have the concept of a notifiable EID, an EID that is trusted by the government and therefore can be trusted in the simplest form, trusted at the same assurance level in other countries in the EU as well. So it's very much a context choice, and the ID itself, because it's contextual, will have issues. We'll be looking at things like levels of assurance and liabilities and all the rest. And you can only do that if you've got a single national ID. You can't have that flexibility. People want that flexibility. I think it will move in the next 5 years, much more of a trend towards that. And then if you tie that in with the federation, much more flexible and more organic federation, identity federation, you'll see that those two mix and match quite well. There's something that's just come up recently that we've talked about, but is that we've seen a lot and in the news recently, and that's EIDs for individuals that aren't on the national registry, for stateless individuals, for people that have very few identity proofing documents or collateral. So, for example, a refugee coming into Europe is a very topical example. There needs to be some way of identifying individuals. You can't give them a national ID citizenship with an EID immediately. There are things like residence EIDs, but there will be there will be some low assurance IDs, because basically somebody comes into Europe or somebody comes into a country with no collateral documents at all, no way of proving his identity, either because he genuinely hasn't got any, or doesn't choose to bring with him a strong identity from the country that he's come from. From that point of view, there will be there is a need, and a recognized need, for an identity that can assert a low level of assurance, but at least will provide you're one-off. Very much like in other countries, in India, for example, where the biometric was originally, the EID was originally designed to say, well, we don't really know who you are or can prove who you are, but we know that there's one of you. And that's exactly that. And that is the way that we're looking at the moment, and this will be one of the big challenges ahead, to try and mix this with the environment and the domain of the trusted IDs at the moment with higher LOAs. Which brings me on to something called step-up levels of assurance. So imagine a world, it's not very far off, well, look at the world where you have people with high levels of assurance documents, credentials, you have medium levels of assurance, you have very low levels of assurance, where you know that you're an individual and that's it, without identity. And you're now looking, or rather not without identity, without a name, say, because identity is somewhat different. But you've got different levels of assurance, and you want somebody with a low level of assurance wants to interact with the government, become a citizen, whatever. So there's something that's looked up very much now called step-up trust, where you're actually stepping up your levels of assurance. You're at level 1 or 1.5, say, and you want to go to 2, 2.5. So from that initial identity to move that up and move that level of assurance up, you want to provide additional information. Now you may want to say, if you're living in a country for a year already, you'll have established some track record, some documents, some reputation that you then want to assert. And that will actually allow you, maybe temporarily or maybe permanently, to increase your LOA, your level of assurance, from say 1.5 to say 2.5, so that you can make a particular transaction. And once you step up, then you can have a new EID with a high level of assurance, and gradually bring the individuals that come in with low levels of assurance up to higher levels. You see, it's not only refugees that we were talking about now. If you look at students, for example, they travel around, they tend to live in student accommodation for a short time, then move on to another place. They don't have utility bills, they don't have any of the things that we use to build a substantial, high assurance identity. So we have to move all these people into the higher levels of assurance. Step up levels of assurance are that, and there's standards now being looked at around ISO and OASIS are doing a lot of work on step-up assurance. So that's something, again, will become more and more predominant as people that have got a level of assurance which allow them to do certain things need to interact more and more at higher levels. Okay, something else, privacy. I think privacy will be much more demonstrable now than, or in the next 5 years than it is at the moment. And I think there could be a move towards monetizing of your identity and your attributes. So you keep yourself to a particular identity, asserting very little information about yourself, but for payment either in money or in kind or in benefits, that you provide additional information. And this is commonly known and talked about for a long time, but I think over the next 5 years, this will move more and more, and actually the monetization of trust and demonstrating that not only do you have privacy, but that's the first step. You demonstrate that you've got privacy, and then you can then actually monetize that and make it of value. I think that's going to happen very much more. So rather than being one of a crowd, you'll actually be able to take that mask off. I was trying to find an identical slide with the people with their faces off, their masks off, but there wasn't one, so I apologize for that. So that's another move that we'll see over the next 5 years. One of the problems with connected identity is what Donna was talking earlier on, with regards to resilience and critical infrastructure. Great to have a connected identity, no good if you haven't got any power or any communications. Had that problem in the States. First responder credentials had a look around towards that. There were devices and methods around that. But what's not really good is that you want to assert your identity, a connected identity, and you're sitting in a place where there's no communications, or in a container, or in a blackout situation. And however we go more and more towards connected identities, it makes us more fragile. And we need to maintain a resilience and look at how that resilience can be maintained. Otherwise, there will always be the issue that you fall back to your government EID, which is a card, that old normal card that you've got your name and picture printed on the outside. So from that point of view, this is a big area that we're going to need to deal with and will be dealt with over the next 5 years, because it's well known and everybody's recognizing that. Okay, I can't do a presentation without talking about the Internet of Things. I'm not going to talk much about it, but the Internet of Things is really, I don't see it too different to regular identity in a way, because you have much greater scale. It's actually although it's a greater scale, it's a subset of normal identity. It's delegated control of identity. So I own my car. I own my heating system at home, and I want to control it, and I want to exert my control over that. So it has an identity. It may communicate with a central server doing something, smart cities as well. But what I want to do is I want to control that other identity. I want to control the attributes and the identity and the uses of the identity of my car. So for example, I may have a brand new Mercedes-Benz with 15 communication links between the car and the central servers. What I don't want to do is, or I don't want to be in 10 years' time when I can't afford to have it serviced at Mercedes, I don't want all the information to go to Mercedes. I want it to go to my local garage. I want the tire information to go to my local tire provider. Or I've got 2 cars, I want them serviced at the same place. So the telematics from the vehicle, I want to control where they go. So that's like delegated identity. So identity is actually, the use of that identity is delegated to me, so I control that. There'll be an independent individual identity, 15 identities in my Mercedes car or whatever, but I want to control it. So I think that this will be an extension and can be an extension of our existing federation systems and identity systems as well. But it's got to be talked about. I'm not talking much more because that will be covered later on today. So I wanted to mention that as well. EID, why is it going to be successful? Why will it get more and more successful? And the reason is marketplace. The more you can do with your identity, connected identity, the more it will be used, and the more successful it will be, and in the circle it will be used more and more and more. So at the moment we see the trends of very large systems, government systems, utilizing identity, large services. They will scale down to smaller, discrete services which are easy to construct, easy to utilize. For example, a company may want to utilize an EID to let you use their garbage trash facility in Belgium, for example. Little application that lets you sit, nothing terrible, that lets you see where you live. You can use this facility, this service. So there will be a marketplace of services that will be available that you can pick and choose, easy to construct, easy to utilize. Again, you can't do that with government systems because they will have their restrictions and governance and all the rest. So proxy IDs will make this, enable this to happen more easily. One other thing, last thing, the measurement of success of a connected identity. How do you measure the success? How do you know it's actually going to work? And in fact, when a citizen, when a user says, thank you for my EID, when they say thank you for my EID, that will be the goal, and we'll know that then it's successful. Now that's great for politics as well, because if you're a politician and you've instituted a particular ID regime or a particular governance or system that allows you to use EIDs properly, if you're thanked by the citizens, that's good. It helps you get voted in again. So that's about it. And thank you very much for your attention, for some muses. And if there are any questions, please. I know I'm running a minute late.
Many thanks, John. I think one question, we have not many time because we run a little bit out of the time window.
Thank you. My name is Sal Franco, economist. You said something very fascinating, talking about Internet of Things devices, when you said the example of my Mercedes car that can be serviced, and then my data can be used for my other cars or wherever I am. Mercedes, for example, sells all over the world. It's not only Germany, Europe, it's in US, in Asia, everywhere. How do you see the possibility to have data downloaded, used in so diverse communities? I'm hinting at the role of standards. How do you foresee that this Internet of Things might have the possibility to leverage whatever is done in Germany, for example, in the US, in South America, or in the Far East?
Thank you. Yeah, standards are going to be very important as the scale grows. And as you move across from Europe to global environment, you're going to need to have the standards and the protocols and the communication. And depending on how IoT works and how it's actually implemented, you can have the devices speaking to the manufacturer's servers, and then you can have the manufacturer's servers communicating, or personally, something I prefer, where you have a digital assistant or individuals have their own portal or environment where they can choose either automatically if they don't really want to get involved in it, or if you're a little bit more into how things work and you're a bit more careful, you can choose where you want your data to go, and that's controlled locally, and then the information goes to the manufacturers. Maybe, for example, take a home environmental control system. You may want to say, yeah, I'm quite happy sending that information to the local authority for statistics, for the smart city stuff, but I want to have the data going to my own portal and then going to maybe a particular power company. And I think that has to be the choice, has to be eventually at the individual end rather than at the end of the manufacturer of the device. So you will need to have standards to do that, and there are standards now being evolved around that. Again, I'll leave that till later on for people to speak, but there are standards going around that.
But I think I can add one point along the TTIP discussion between European Commission and the United States. There was clear the understanding that the car-to-car communication in the United States follow another standard than in Europe. Also the car-to-infrastructure, so it's completely different ways and different policies behind. And the car industry knows that cars for the United States cannot come back to Europe in the future because they're designed for this area only. So this is at this work. But nevertheless, I think we must stop for today.